Welcome to How to Kill a Bill, the podcast where bad bills go to die. I'm your host, Sunshine Moore Anger, and on today's episode, we're talking to my good friend Dawn, who currently lobbies on healthcare issues all over the country and who previously lobbied on behalf of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dawn shares his insights on what it's like to lobby in different states and some of his favorite ways to kill a bill. If you have a funny, shady, or interesting story you'd like to share, please reach out in the comments, visit howtokillabill.com, or email us at contact@howtokillabill.com. And maybe you can be a guest on a future episode. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe so you can be notified when we post new content. We're a fledgling podcast, and the only way to grow our audience is if listeners like you help spread the word. Dawn, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
To get us started, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what you do and how you got here?
Well, I am considered what's called an in-house lobbyist. Essentially, what my role as a lobbyist is to really advocate everything for the company that I work for.
And you cover all 50 states and DC, is that right?
I do. I do. The one thing we've learned I've been in the private sector now 7 years, and one thing I learned about the private sector is it never stops. So starting out in about 7 states, I went to 13, I went to 18, and then the next thing I know, I was at the top of the government affairs structure, really the last person standing after we had a merger and acquisition, and all of the states fell under and the feds fell under my operation, and now you have to figure it out. And so I've been trying to figure that out for the last couple of years.
So let me ask you this question. What is your favorite state to lobby in? And if you're willing to say, what's your least favorite state to lobby in and why?
God, favorite state. I really, really liked Montana. We had business there for a good number of years, and I liked lobbying Montana because it was small. Montana was really great because the capital, Helena, it's everything. That city is everything capital. It's everything Helena. It's everything about state government. There's not a major university there. It's a limited state government, so you don't have throngs of state employees there necessarily. Helena is just very down to earth. There's the one Starbucks, and it's in the Safeway, and that's where you go. That's what I love. Montana was just easy to lobby because they're ranchers. They had jobs that most legislators in other states don't have. You don't have a lot of real estate agents and insurance folks and bankers and stuff. You have ranchers and you have veterinarians and you have just jobs that you don't see in other states, and that is what I like. So that's probably my favorite. And I haven't been there in a while because our business has moved, but I will tell you, it's fun. That's a fun state.
So is there a state that is just not your favorite to go lobby in?
Yeah, Illinois. So
Really?
yeah, Springfield is tough. Everything is influenced in Springfield from what happens in Chicago. Now, Chicago is a great city. I spent a lot of time there. We love it. But I'm going to Chicago to have a good time and get a great meal and see some shows and stuff like that. But in Illinois, if you're in the political business, you're doing a lot of it in Chicago, and Springfield is only kind of a have-to thing because that happens to be where the capital is. But nobody's there. Nobody's there full. So everybody comes to Springfield. Cheyenne, Wyoming is a little bit like this too. Nobody lives there on purpose unless they have to. And so they're always somewhere else, St. Louis, Chicago, because that's where the power brokers are for the legislature. And so there's a lot of stuff that happens outside of Springfield. So when you go to lobby Springfield, you never know who you're going to be there to lobby. So I would say Illinois is hard to lobby. And it's just not one I like to because there's a lot of deals that are cut long before you get there.
I used to lobby in Oregon and Washington, and they're both very similar, where the biggest city in the state is not necessarily the capital. So when you go to Oregon, there's a lot of things that happen in Portland, but the capital's in Salem. And in Washington, you fly into Seattle, but then you have to get to Olympia. And I've gotten stuck in Olympia because there are no Ubers and there's no cabs and it's snowing. And if it's not during legislative session, you're stuck outside with no way to get back to the airport. So you do make a good point about when the capital is not necessarily the biggest city in the state and sort of the dynamics that play out with that. So switching gears a little bit, kind of diving down into what you're actually doing on a day to day basis and some of the things that you've experienced. In one of our early episodes, we talk about the tactics that lobbyists use to their advantage to kill a bill. And for our listeners, if you haven't listened to it yet, go back and listen to it. Let us know in the comments if you've ever used any of these tactics or if there were any that we missed that we should cover on a future episode. But some of the ways that we listed were to kill a bill, you can run out the clock, get a poison pill amendment added to the bill, or delay the effective date. Have you ever used any of these methods in your career? If so, which ones, or any that I didn't mention that are sort of your go tos when you're trying to kill a bill?
Well, all of the above, and I've used all of the above on both sides of the fence when I was a legislative staffer and as an in-house and now here in the private sector. But they're different tactics that fit different legislatures. And so let me explain, that aspect of this. There are full-time legislatures, 7, 8, or 9, depending on, how you define a full-time legislature around the country. California is the best known one, and then, Washington and Wisconsin and Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania. And so on a full-time legislature, there is running out the clock doesn't always necessarily, it's a tactic, but it's not the most effective tactic because they're always around. And so just because you kind of get something buried in a committee, they're always going to have a session day. They're always going to have a committee hearing day where they can always kind of pull it back and then just do a bunch of bills at the end of session and chuck them out. And so the running out the clock part works in a short session. So the Virginias, the Minnesotas, the Iowas, the Louisianas, where their sessions are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 days at the most, running the clock stuff out is great. And it's a great tactic in those states because there's usually a lot that they have to do. And if it's a bill you don't want, then clearly you either get consensus on other people who don't want it, but that's harder to do. Legislators don't want to go on record until they actually have to, or they talk to their colleagues and stuff like that. So by not getting consensus on a bill, has the net effect of running the clock out because at the point when they actually have to get it past the suspense date, where it has to be out of the committee of origin or the house of origin by a certain date, and then it dies there. And if they can't get it out of the house of origin, it's dead. And so now you've cleared that off the decks and you can start working on something else. And so those tactics are very, very different based on where you're at. I would say on the long-term full-time legislatures, you can run the clock out by simply continuing to address and adapt and amend the bill. You can continue to negotiate it and say, bring in more stakeholders and create more conversation. And you can kind of lard it up and, make it more complicated than it probably needs to be. And then in the end of a full-time legislature, when they get to the final days, and, you've seen this in California, just because they've been in session for 9, 10 months, now they've got like 48 hours to do all the things they didn't do before. And then it becomes a Virginia-like feeling in session. And I just went through and we killed 3 or 4 of them in Sacramento this last year over the weekend, like from Friday to Sunday. Again, that's some of the same stuff. The biggest one, and my favorite one, is fiscal notes. If you can find a way, and it's not, and we often have help from the state. If you can find a way to create a cost on a bill that you don't like, that is something that the legislature clearly is going to choke on, and the state agency doesn't want to do, or the governor doesn't want to spend the money, that's better than a poison pill in a bill. And poison pill is just a provision that not everybody can get behind, and it kind of has the net effect of having the bill essentially do the opposite. But the fiscal note, you don't change the spirit of the bill. You just say, oh, yeah, by the way, it's going to cost $200 million. Well, okay, we're good. As are we, and then we move on. And those are the types of things that at the end of session in a full-time legislature, oftentimes the fear of the fiscal note is what holds it up in the first place. But when that finally, hits the deck, then you just kind of sit back and watch the appropriations committee say, yeah, okay, we're good.
I love that you mentioned that. Getting a fiscal note put on the bill is on our list of the top ways to kill a bill. And I'll give you a specific example. You and I both work in healthcare. And so California has tried many, many times to introduce single payer. And whether you like the idea of single payer, don't like the idea of single payer, every time they introduce it, What ends up happening is they get an analysis done on that bill and they discover it's going to cost the state $400 billion to implement single payer. Guess what the total state budget of California is? $200 billion for schools and roads and healthcare and public safety. So we're going to double the entire state budget just for one system. So everyone who sponsors that bill, introduces the bill, makes promises that they're going to, if they get elected, they're going to vote yes on the bill. There's no way that a legislator can vote yes on something that's going to double the entire state budget of California, no matter how much they want to. And it has died so many times because of the fiscal nil.
It has. And what's interesting, I mean, those are ideas. Single payer, clearly. It's cost more than the entire state budget. It's a great idea. Nobody would want, people that don't like it, obviously, but it is an altruistic thing that everybody fundamentally believes in, by and large, in California. And if they could pay for it, they would. There's no question. If they had the money, I think it would have been done years ago. But it's not because of that. So the best ideas that all of them support can't be done because of an enormous fiscal no.
You were a lobbyist in the education field for many, many years. You lobbied for the University of Wisconsin-Madison, one of the most influential voices in the Capitol here in the state of Wisconsin. For those of you who don't know UW-Madison, it's a Big Ten school. Go Badgers. It's ranked 25th in the country and 27th in the world. They have more than 48,000 students and more than 24,000 staff. That's a ratio of 2 to 1 for students to staff, with an annual budget of over $4 billion. And while all of that is incredibly impressive, you once killed a bill by convincing legislators that university students love ketchup.
Yes. Tommy Thompson once told me, and he was a former governor, 16 years here in the state. And when I got into the lobbying world, before I started at the university, he said to me, legislators and governors live by stories. And all you need to do to be successful is to tell them a better story. Give them a better story because they will repeat that story over and over and over again. And so I've employed that in some of my tactics that I've used. We had a piece of legislation that was spawned from a procurement that the university did to buy food. They were looking for a food distributor for the campus, and they had hired a company that was based in Iowa instead of a company that was quote unquote sort of based here in Wisconsin. They were actually Houston based, but they had a big distribution center here. And that's key to the tactic that I used. And so when the company that lost went to the legislature and said, well, we need, the university to buy Wisconsin, buy local and use the lowest cost bid out there. These are two tactics that companies use that when they lose procurements. They want to put procurement language into state law, and it binds institutions, public institutions, as to how they go out and procure things. I've always said, and it's across all industries, the surefire way to complicate a procurement from the state is to put procurement rules in state law. And so they wanted to do a bill to do this. And so I brought my procurement specialist and I said, I need to understand what was the differentiating factor in choosing this out of state firm. And they said, well, we look at pricing, which is usually 70 to 75% of the scoring rubric, but we look at other non-tangible factors that aren't part of price. And it has to do with what our unique needs are. And so when you write a procurement, you always try to find out what those unique needs are of that potential customer. And in the case of the university, they cared about how quickly can you get food to campus, meaning where's your distribution center? And this one company had it about an hour away, and it's about a 3-hour turnaround time to get food to campus. The other one had a distribution center like right next to campus. And so I said, all right, well, what is the biggest concern about what's the food that we're most concerned about? And he said it was ketchup. And he said ketchup is the number one food that students demand on campus. And it's a bad day if you run out of ketchup. And so I
Because of
said,
the French fries? Because they're eating
you
so
know,
many tater tots and French fries?
apparently, yeah, or just scooping it out of the can or something like that. But
2 o'clock in the morning.
yeah. So I said, all right. let's tell that story at the committee. And so I had them tell the story at the committee. And they told it, in a way that, strategically, this is why we care about it. And they said, by the way, ketchup was one of the factors that we cared about. And it could have been ketchup, could have been bagels, could have been anything. But ketchup, I thought, was memorable and ridiculous enough to really kind of attach to the bill an element that had legislators sit back and think, do we really want to legislate how the university buys ketchup? Nobody does. And I knew nobody wanted to, but I wanted to kill the bill and I wanted to do it in a way that would have never come back. And, there are bills that come back every session. These are perpetual bills. This one never came back. Everybody gets it when you're out of ketchup. You change your entire dinner plans if you don't have it. And so that was just, I tried to find tactics like that are memorable. It's the most ridiculous thing you could ever think of that you would want to talk about in a legislative committee hearing, but it turned the day and the bill went away. With that legislator, we still laugh about it, and that was probably 15 years ago.
Don, thanks so much for being on our show today. Thanks for sharing with our listeners how to kill a bill.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to How to Kill a Bill, the podcast where bad bills go to die. Please comment below with your reaction to today's episode. Let us know, what's your favorite or least favorite state to lobby in? Have you ever successfully killed a bill by telling legislators a ridiculous story? As always, if you or someone you know is a current or former lobbyist, staffer, or policymaker, or if you have a funny, shady, or interesting story you'd like to share, please reach out to us in the comments. Visit howtokillabill.com or email us at contact@howtokillabill.com. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe so you never miss new content and to help our podcast reach a wider audience.